This is At Ease, the military podcast of Thomas Nelson Community College. I'm Gary Pounder, a member of the military team here at TNCC, and on today's edition of the podcast, we're very honored to be joined by Mr. Mike Kuhns, who is the chairman of the Thomas Nelson College Board. Mike has been a very important member of the community here in Southeast Virginia for a number of years right now. Many of you knew him as the president, CEO of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. And, of course, he's been serving on the Thomas Nelson board for a number of years. We're going to talk today about the function of the board, the role the board played in the recent search for a new college president, and where Mike sees Thomas Nelson heading in the years ahead. So, Mike, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Thanks, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here and good to see you again.
Good to see you again as well. Before we get into the, Thomas Nelson board, where the college is going, where we're at right now, I want to get a little bit on your background, your experience, and you actually began, as I recall, as a U.S. Army officer. Tell us about your military background and kind of the career path that eventually led you here to Virginia.
Well, based on the fact that I am a senior citizen, the career path is rather lengthy, but it did begin with 6 years of service in the United States Army. I was an EOD commander, a captain at the time, and that was an interesting experience. I was right out of college during the Vietnam War, and going into EOD, a lot of people say, well, you got to be crazy to do that. And of course, back then there were no robots. They gave you a pair of pliers, and that was about it. A knife, and say okay. But they did give us a very, very highly trained detachment to work with, senior NCOs and up and coming E5s and E6s. So it was pretty cool. It was a great experience during my service. I was able to render safe actually 402 IEDs during that time.
Wow! And
I served on my unit. Actually, we did a lot of presidential protection during that time. Secret Service didn't have bomb disposal units, nor did the police departments, except for St. Louis, Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. We did a lot of tech escort, which is escorting trains and convoys across the country carrying sensitive war materials and CBR stuff generally. And then we also did a lot of training of Metro Police Departments at that time, because it was during the Vietnam conflict. There was a lot of civil unrest, and it was more than the 10 EOD units across the country could serve. We were stationed in strategically located, but I was in St. Louis, or outside of St. Louis in Granite City Army Depot, and we covered like 3 states. Mm-hmm. And then there were 9 other units in the country. And then we also did a lot of training for the federal agencies, the FBI, and other law enforcement agencies, as well as the alphabet agencies. So it was really interesting, but probably the most significant part of it was the foundation it laid for, I believe, my success in my career, and just learning. It was really fun, and people think that's weird to say that based on what the job was, but it was fun. Everybody was safe for the entire time, but it was a great developmental period in my life. I was a young kid at 03, and I had extraordinary senior NCOs, as well as very, very smart, hand-picked junior enlisted people. And so I think probably what I learned from it was, first of all, I learned to listen, obviously, and to take advice and solve problems. Situational awareness was the key to success in, obviously, in rendering safe IED. So I think that I carried that with me for the rest of my life, particularly knowing that the senior NCOs had so much experience, practical experience, and back then they were high school graduates, self-educated, but they were experts, and they understood leadership, they understood motivation, they looked out for me, and I looked out for them, and I think that's the valuable lesson you carry on throughout your life.
And a very important lesson, too. And you mentioned that EOD, of course, is a very demanding career field. You're really only as good as your last job. You got to make sure you're going to cut the right wire and not the wrong wire. And then, as I recall, after leaving active duty in the Army, you went on to work for the federal government. Tell us about that.
I did. Because I guess we were successful in those 402 render safe operations, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms recruited me, and I was a regular Army officer at the time, so that required me to resign my commission. I stayed in the reserves for a short period of time and went to work for ATF and continued to do a lot of things surrounding explosives control, as well as helping set up crime scene restoration units, training within ATF, and then later on within major metropolitan police departments. And I worked for them for about 3 years, left them, and to go into business for myself, family-owned business. My father had some medical issues at the time. And my wife had a couple little kids and decided that it was best that maybe I'd come home every now and then. So I left government service and went into private business. And from there, it's been a migration of wonderful things.
When you went into the private sector, you mentioned you went to work for your family firm, but along the way, you began to get involved in a couple of areas that have really become passions for you, that being higher education, specifically at the community college level, and also economic development. So tell us about how you got involved in those areas in your time in Illinois.
Well, in the 80s, I was running my own businesses, and of course, when I went to college, a computer that couldn't do anything close to what our watches can do today filled 2 warehouses. And so I decided that it was time for me to automate, if you will, the shipping practices of the companies I had in that. And so I went and took a course at a community college on data processing and applications and writing code back then, DOS and Fortran and some other stuff that I'm not even sure exists today. And in that course of time, I became friends with my professor, and he said there was a particular opening for an adjunct position in sales and marketing, which was one of my majors in college, and suggested that I might want to apply for it. And so I did, and oddly enough, I was hired and began teaching classes and doing some innovative stuff using video technology and sales classes and things that had never been done before, and they had a great TV studio. So I became engaged in teaching adults primarily for about 6 years. And then the college president wanted to have a greater impact in the African American community and serve females, unemployed people in particular. And he wanted to develop a small business development program. And so he hired me to put that together. I turned my businesses over to some managers and became a remote at that time, way back then, in running those businesses, and began to develop the self-employment training program, which was very interesting because it did focus on unemployed minorities and females. And one of the major requirements they had to have was that they had to have a skill, such as being a plumber, a painter, electrician, some kind of experience that we didn't have to teach them a particular skill, but we would teach them how to run a business and set up a network of mentors, a support system, safety net, if you will, 15-week class every day. It also, because of the sign of the times in Central Illinois at the time, a lot of it was a fully diverse class way back then, and we discussed the issues of minorities doing business only in the minority community as opposed to doing business in the total community, and those kinds of cultural things that needed to be discussed. The elephant in the room kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it worked out very well. At the end of the program, or when I left the program and was hired away from it, basically, we had achieved, we had 57 startups. We created over 127 jobs, saved the government 600,000 in entitlements, unemployment, that type of thing, and we gave 57 people an opportunity for a future, and had actually we had only 2 failures at the time that I departed, which is unheard of in the small business arena, and so it became a national model, actually, and the president of the college and I did the tour. Back in those days, it was AACJC, American Association of Colleges and Community and Junior Colleges. We traveled the circuit and spread the word about what could be done. And fortunately, it was recognized. Fortunately for the college, it was recognized in the House of Representatives and the state government of Illinois, and became a model. And it was fun. It was. I think I've told you this before. It was probably the most rewarding, one of the most rewarding 2 years that I've spent in my life, just to see these great people succeed when given the opportunity.
And that was really an amazing record of success. And we should point out, too, again, based on what you have told me about this time in your life, this was a period in central Illinois when the economy was not doing particularly well. Caterpillar had a massive downsizing as the economy was contracting. So what you were doing there in the program through the community college was really very important economically, not only for those people, but for the entire region.
It was a catalyst. We had great press coverage. The college president was pretty much, hey, this is the end result. Now just go do it. It was a low budget program too. Actually, this whole thing only cost about $60,000 a year. But we put together networks of bankers, accountants, attorneys, interested people, used car dealers, for example. One woman cleaned houses and was very well thought of, but she rode a bike between clients. And we said, well, if we got her a car, she could have more clients. And so a bank stepped up and said, we'll buy a used car and guarantee that it's operable for you, and we'll keep it fixed. You make this small payment and pay it off. And so we did creative things like that. But it was a whole community coming together in collaboration, focusing on the college, which attracted other students, particularly in the non-credit lifelong learning arena. And a lot of the graduates of this program came back and started taking accounting classes and marketing classes for credit, and went on to get degrees. So it was great. It was a lot of fun. And the person who we hired to take my place as I moved out of the college arena into economic development carried on very well. And then probably for another 5-6 years, and we had made a commitment to each enrollee that the program would support them for 5 years after successful completion of the course. So
that was your first experience at a community college, and you saw some of the impact you could have. What were some of the big takeaways that you personally and professionally gained from that experience?
Well, wow, it was huge. I think the general experience was, first of all, the teaching experience as an adjunct, even though I was an adult and owned a number of businesses, and I was older than most of the adults in my class that I taught, I learned more from them probably than they learned from me, because there was a diverse life's interest in there, and they learned from each other in the manner in which we were allowed to teach, using video cameras and that to teach people how to sell, and then obviously the academic material behind that. And I think what I learned mostly, that if you construct a program of value, when I first presented this program, I was born and raised in Peoria, Illinois. My father was quite prominent, so I went to all my friends I graduated with and said, hey, this is a great thing, the bankers, the attorneys, and all that. And I said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take unemployed people and we're going to train them. And it fell flat. So I went back to the college president and I said, boy, we need to rethink this thing. And he said, well, have at it. And so I left, and I decided, I don't know what, it came to me at some point, very, very quickly, I might add, because I thought my position was in jeopardy at that time. I went back and called my friends back together again. I said, this is an economic development program. This is going to create customers for you. It's going to create jobs for other people, which is customers for you. And so this is an economic development program. And they all turned their heads and said yes and supported it. And we moved on. And I think the lesson was to look for the practical aspect of these programs and what it means to the person you're trying to get to assist you. So there's a win-win, basically, and that was a valuable lesson. But the most valuable lesson was if you give people an opportunity, and they have the desire and passion and the support, people can do anything.
Now, you carried that lesson or lessons that you learned into economic development, which was kind of the next phase of your professional career. And you worked in economic development there in Illinois, your home state, and then took kind of a detour to Idaho. Tell us about that.
I did. I worked in economic development during the Rust Belt years in Peoria. Then my boss at the time, the CEO I worked for a large regional development organization as the CFO, as well as the chief operating officer of the economic development arm. He told me he was going to retire, and he was a great mentor of mine. And he said, do you want my job? And I was going through a change in my personal life at the time, and I said, I think I'd like to go someplace else. And he said, well, I would support whatever you want to do. So a position opened up in Idaho Falls, Idaho that, good Lord, you couldn't go any farther away almost, to run the Chamber of Commerce there, but it also included being the chief tourism officer for the state of Idaho for the Yellowstone, Teton, northeastern region of Idaho in the three states. And it was a kind of a collaborative, a compact of the three states. I thought, wow, I've never done that. And then the third thing was I would be the lobbyist for the nuclear industry, which is very large outside of Idaho. At that time, there were 5,000 employees in the Idaho nuclear lab.
That's where the Navy used to train their nuclear technicians, as I recall.
That is correct. There are mock-ups of submarines half in the sand. Admiral Rickover positioned that there, and in that area, and it is out in the middle of the desert. I mean, like, holy cow! I'm trying to. Where are we going here? I forgot where we were going.
Well, we're out on the Idaho desert, and the nuclear industry was very strong out there, thanks largely to the presence of the U.S. Navy. But you were also involved in, as you said, in the tourism. You were involved in economic development, and very successful in that phase as well, obviously. And then something brought you here to Southeast Virginia.
Actually, it is my wife that brought me here. We knew each other in Central Illinois. I left to go to Idaho. She moved out here, and then we had some long distance relationship. And since I was lobbying for the nuclear industry, I would come to Washington on a regular basis, monthly almost. I'd always come down to Newport News, and finally we decided that wasn't the best thing to do, and we were wasting a lot of time. I was getting older, and and I always wanted to say I sailed on the Illinois River, but that was like. It's like 12 feet deep and 20 feet wide. And so I said, well, where are we going to live? And we picked this part of the country. And she was an executive recruiter at the time. And so I moved out here and became a consultant, an organizational consultant for 42 chambers of commerce. And I worked for a company that was owned by 14 chambers in the Commonwealth, a kind of a unique organization, and it was housed at the Hampton Roads Chamber, and the Virginia Peninsula Chamber was one of the major shareholders also. So I spent about 7 years traveling the state trying to help the chambers of commerce, and there at that time were about 102 of them. Help them become better chambers, employ technology, get engaged in legislative advocacy, small business development, that type the thing.
And eventually you came here to Newport News. You're already here living in the area, obviously, but you became the chief executive officer of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. So tell us about that experience and how that kind of led you to Thomas Nelson.
Well, that was interesting. I got tired of the drive to Hampton Roads Chamber, which was in Norfolk, and I asked my CEO at the time if I could find an office space on the peninsula. Would it be okay if I just located there and come in for meetings, whatever he wanted? And he said, sure, go ahead, as long as it doesn't cost anything. So I went to the Peninsula Chamber and was talking to the CEO at that time, and they said, well, we have plenty of office space, but in exchange, help us out with our technology on a little more personal level. And I said, okay, that's a deal. And I ceased to drive. And in the meantime, over a period of time too, my wife had some issues and is a cancer survivor, and we went through that. And so it was very helpful to be able not to spend 2 hours on the road every day. And then the opportunity arose for me to be hired or recruited away to take over as CEO and kind of transform the chamber into modernize it, if you will, give it a facelift, and move it in a different direction than it had been going. And so I did that, and that was fun. And in that course, then of course we got engaged with Thomas Nelson, got thoroughly immersed with the military population, the small business population, and it's sort of history now. Retired 2.5 years ago, and I got to tell you, retirement rocks.
Well, I always say you're probably the busiest retired guy that I know, but I've got to ask you, as we get into your relationship and your role here at Thomas Nelson, you were involved in education in Illinois. You were involved in economic development in Illinois, Idaho, and here in Virginia. What did you find in terms of contrast? How was economic development different in central Illinois versus northeastern Idaho versus southeastern Virginia? And are there things that maybe you saw in those other locations that perhaps we're not doing or not doing a very good job of here in Tidewater, Virginia?
Well, Idaho and Illinois were pretty similar. They're both economic development outside of the city of Chicago in Illinois was conducted by private organizations. They were 501c6s or 501c3s, either charitable or nonprofit organizations. Same thing in Idaho. And they generally contracted out their services to the localities, and then had the localities would have a liaison to that organization, so that the one that I ran in Central Illinois, I believe we had 5 counties, 7 localities, and I had an economic development professional in each of those areas except for the smaller counties, which might have doubled up. And basically their job was to help in attraction and expansion, retention of businesses. My job was to keep the county boards happy, construct the contracts, make sure we're meeting our performance marks and all that sort of thing. Very different revenue sharing amongst all of the localities. In my history, and the same thing it functioned that way in Idaho too, we were very close to the Chamber of Commerce in both areas. Here, if I were to look at it, it's very parochial here, and we read about it in the paper all the time, how nobody gets along and all that. I will say, having worked on the South Side and on the Peninsula is a much more cohesive, collaborative region than my impression of the South Side was when I was working, and I need to throw that caveat in there because I haven't paid attention to it since I left. But I think the difference is every locality, large or small, whether it's Poquoson or Newport News or Hampton, they all have their own economic development department. And Newport News may have like 20 people or whatever, so there's inherent competitiveness. They all get along personally, but to me, there's not a lot of revenue sharing going on, and I think that's sort of the key. If you can share revenue, then everybody's got something in the game. It's just it's very difficult to bring the region together, and there are players that want that to happen, and then there are players that perhaps don't, or are happy with in a silo environment.
Do you think we're making any real progress in that area, or do you think that we're still essentially a parochial type region?
Well, it's kind of interesting. The historic triangle broke off from Hampton Roads Economic Development Alliance a number of years ago, and they formed their own historic triangle alliance, if you will, with York County, James City County, and Williamsburg. And for reasons, I think probably because they have a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of contiguous business districts, if you will, if you go down Richmond Road and that type of thing. So it perhaps makes a lot of sense, and they're pretty much tourism oriented. You come down into Newport News and Hampton, it's very interesting. It seems, it goes in fits and spurts, but Hampton seems to really be clicking on all cylinders lately. And I think that, there's an effort there. We did, prior to my retirement, we did start negotiations with all of the localities in the region, the economic development people, and to form a group called Peninsula Economic Resource Team, which eventually evolved into an industrial finance authority, and that was signed, I think, a couple of years ago. It was not signed while I was there, and that we would meet monthly and bring all the economic development people together and look at projects and things, and that was good. I don't see much in the paper about activity with that, and revenue sharing was one of the primary reasons for doing that. But I think that things happen slowly in Virginia. I think that's a great step, and there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, this is so rich. This is such a rich environment here with all of the educational institutions, the shipyard, the repair yards, NASA, JBLE, Joint Base Langley Eustis, the weapons station. I mean, you can go on and on. JLab. It's so rich in opportunities. It just kind of boggles my mind that we're not able to really pull it all together. However, I think a community college there's a role in there for the community college. And
that brings me to my next question. Obviously, you had the experience with community colleges back in Illinois. You come here to Southeast Virginia. You're the CEO of the VPCC, the local Chamber of Commerce, and at some point, you're asked to join the Thomas Nelson board, and it must have been probably both an honor, and I'm sure you saw it as being a real opportunity as well.
Well, I did, and I was honored when the mayor of Newport News informed me that I was appointed in 2015. When I came to the board, I've seen all these things, these opportunities in this target-rich environment, if you will. And was hopeful that we'd be able to position Thomas Nelson in a real leadership and a catalyst role, if you will. So I was named the liaison to the Educational Foundation for the Thomas Nelson for 2 years, 2015 to 17, and then became the vice chair for 2017 to 19. And my first term was up then. It's 2 4-year terms, and you're out the door, which is probably okay. And then in 2019, I became the chair. So I think now, we've just completed probably the most important decision this board and the board members that I've served with could ever make, and that's the selection of a new president at a time that is absolutely wonderful. I mean, there's so many changes going on. we needed some change, and we needed some a transformational leader. And so with that coming, and then COVID came along, and so you all changed your methods of delivery of products and services, and it's like a rebirth. And I have to tell you, I'm really amazed at how extraordinary the faculty and staff have been in this COVID transformation of delivery of products and services. I mean, it's just amazing. And then to have an interim president who really has done a great job in opening up lines of communications. Dr. Greg DeCinque has done a fine job, but COVID struck him, and he's a people person, and he can't, everything's shut down. You're remotely. So I think we're really, the renaming. We're having a renaming task force, which we can talk about later. There's another opportunity. These are all opportunities that we can turn around and really transform Thomas Nelson into what we want it to be, and to build on a vision for the future, and what's needed within the workforce, and also the academic side.